Hi, I'm Jennifer Poole,
And I'm Dave Poole.
and this is our 20 days.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Our 20 Days. I'm Dave Poole. First of all, let me apologize for any background noise you might hear. I'm in our Mount Pleasant home today in one of our studios, and we're having our roof replaced. This is day 2 of a roofing project. Should be wrapping up today, but you might hear some banging and clanging around, so my apologies. It's also a bit of a metaphor, the whole idea of replacing one's roof. A significant portion of your home provides a lot of protection for you. The genesis of today's episode's idea is I retired on April 1st, 2022, so 16 months ago, I guess it would be, from AM Conservation Group, a part of Franklin Energy, where I was most recently vice president of technology. And it just gotten to a point where it was time for me to do something else. So this has been a more interesting transition in my life than I had expected. Nothing bad, just very different. And I thought it was valuable to talk about because, especially with COVID and some of the other lifestyle changes that we've had, the so-called quitting economy where folks are kind of, half-timing their jobs or just totally giving up on jobs and changing out in completely different careers or deciding to take time off. So whether it's job changes, retirement, lifestyle changes, people, changing in relationships. It's a big deal these days. I was reading a Wall Street Journal article here a few weeks ago talking about how a number of people, and this particular article was focused on retirement, but people really lose track of who they are and are spending large sums of money on retreats and clinics and sessions and psychologist time. Literally thousands of dollars to go figure out what to do with their life, with their new thing. There was an article also, or not, it wasn't an article, it was actually an episode of the Dan Patrick Show, sports talk show, that had Steve Young, the former NFL quarterback, Hall of Famer from the San Francisco 49ers, went to Brigham Young in college, played in the USFL for a bit. Later in life, went on to be a football analyst for ESPN, among others. And his point of view was that when he retired from playing professional football, his thought was he didn't initially recognize it, but the way he characterized it was very poignant. He said, that person died. Literally, that part of his life was over. Everything that he had ever been given accolades for were no longer traits that were valued in his new life. So the fact that he was a great athlete, could throw a great spot, or was a fine running, scrambling quarterback, would make something out of nothing. So yeah, you could argue some of those underlying traits, serve you well in life. But, all that, doing your job in front of a stadium full of 80,000 people, just not there, getting that instant feedback of a crowd, just not part of his life, whatever that was going to be going forward. And I never really thought of the idea of thinking that whoever that person was died. I do remember having a conversation with John Langenbahn, who is a great mentor of mine, vice president of technology, information resources at the Mead Corporation. I worked either with or around John indirectly for probably 15 years, I guess, in my mid to late 20s into my 30s, up to about age 40 perhaps. And John was just one of those guys that was tremendously insightful. And his point of view was that in your career, at least for him, he felt like he needed to kind of reinvent himself, and that was his word, reinvent himself, about every decade or so. And, I never set out on that course intentionally, but when I look back at my life, that's about right. So I started playing music professionally when I was 14 years old. And yeah, I had some other jobs. I worked at McDonald's and some other stuff. But for about the first decade of my life into my early 20s, that's kind of how I made money. And then I went to college, of course, and all of that. But my first jobs, as it were, outside of playing music, were as a doer type of thing. So I was a programmer, a developer, did a little bit of sales work, but this was being feet on the street, hands on the keyboard, doing your thing. And after a few years of doing that, I kind of transitioned into management roles, managing small groups of other similar skill sets that I had. Programmers or developers, managed the systems engineering group, which brought in some instrumentation types of guys, but again, predominantly software-based things I was doing. And then transitioned into kind of leadership roles, again, still focused on technology and kind of technology adjacent things. But again, different set of skills. It was really about encouragement and development of others and setting strategy and organizational goals at a higher level. Definitely more leadership roles. And after several years of doing that, transitioned into more entrepreneurship types of things. So taking the leadership stuff, kind of synthesizing it with some other things, and taking some more risks, both financially and operationally, than I had taken in other jobs. Always had a bit of a safety net in every other role I'd ever had. And then kind of later into my so-called retirement years. So I choose not to call them retirement. I think I'm going to be pretty active. I am pretty active now, 16, 17 months into this. So I think it's probably not a great way to call it retirement, but I'll just call them my later years. And from there, it's an interesting discussion because I have run into some things over these few months that I had not really considered. So for one, I've been pretty fortunate. Mine has not been a cold turkey retirement. Most folks that I know, when they quote retire, they stop doing what they've done all their lives and then transition into something else, whether it's playing a lot of golf or doing travel or gardening or whatever your thing might be. It's kind of out of one into another. Mine has been more gradual. So after my official retirement date of April 1st, 2022, since then, up until the first part of 23, I'll say the first couple of months of 2023, I still spent 20 or 30 hours a week doing project work for my former employer, AM Conservation Group. And so I still had all those relationships, still talked to people every day, still had meetings scheduled. I had to, goals that I had to meet for other people. But it wasn't the level of responsibility that I'd previously had. And it wasn't the same exactly. So, obviously a little bit different. So I'd spent a lot of time as I transitioned into that part of my life thinking financially. Okay, where's the money going to come from? How much money do I already have? How long do I expect to live? What are my risk points? What do I have to manage? What sort of skills do I need that I didn't have? What about my wife? What about taking care of my mother-in-law who lives with us? All of that. And I didn't spend any time thinking about that Steve Young comment. Frankly, I'd never heard it until very recently. But to continue that analogy, my so-called death has been much more deliberate and much more of a steady decline as opposed to an event. So I'm fortunate. I've had some time to think this through and adapt and try some different things, and it's worked out well. But let's talk about a few things in terms of what the transition means for people, whether it's an event or if it's a transitional period like the slow death that I used. I find that I've lost a lot of form and structure to my life. Everything had kind of been a Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 sort of thing. Yeah, there was long days sometimes and long weeks sometimes, but by and large it was a get up Monday morning, do your thing, do that through Friday, have your weekends, do your thing personally. And you had reporting hierarchies and an obvious to-do list, and again, other people having expectations of me to deliver certain value in our work environment. But I've also lost some of those daily relationships. Yeah, all of us experienced some of that during COVID. and learned how to replace at least some of that via technology, Zoom and whatnot. But the idea of going to an office every day and having a conversation with somebody in the break room or at the water cooler or as you're walking in from the parking lot, all that kind of incidental communication is largely gone. And that there's a lot of value in that, because you realize that one, those people are part of your life and I'm part of theirs, and now you've kind of separated all that, and it feels very different. And related to that, Jennifer and I both are very extroverted types of people and get a lot of our personal energy from interactions with other folks. And as you lose that, you need to find some place to energize yourself. And we haven't always succeeded there, but it's something we've worked on. And then you got to think in terms of your personal relationships change. So Jennifer and I are good communicators. We don't always communicate perfectly with each other, and that's something that's been pointed out as we've gone through this 16, 18 months of my transition from what I was doing every day, and that soon you find yourself intruding on somebody else's space that you didn't used to intrude upon, just by fact of I'm someplace else and I'm not underfoot, and vice versa. So you always hear those jokes about the stay-at-home spouse regretting that somebody that worked for a living retired and is now they can't get them out of the way. It's not the case in our situation, but schedules do change, and again, it kind of comes back to your personal energy and where you get that and where you expend it. And it's something that I'd never used this word in my own self-evaluation, but depression really becomes a thought. You start to think about how you've always kind of perceived yourself in the world and your place in life, and then that changes, and you don't always have all the answers and how to react to that and how to make changes to it. So I wouldn't say I've experienced depression, at least in a clinical sense, but I've seen that valley from here, and you do need to figure out. I've needed to spend time to figure out who I am and what I provide for folks and what people provide me. So let's maybe take a little bit of a turn and talk about what have I been doing. So like I said there a moment ago, I've struggled with a lot of this as well, certainly more than I expected. It was a much bigger transition for me, even given the steady decline of activity with other people as opposed to a sudden event. I spend time every day kind of thinking about, who am I now, and what's my value, and what's important to me. I've been fortunate that in this transition for me, I've had a couple of things that have remained steady. So many of you know we own a Molly Maid residential housekeeping franchise here in the Charleston area. Jennifer and I have owned that for 20 years. And even there, we're going through some transitions. We're trying to spend a little less time in the day-to-day of what we do, and installing a management team to do a lot of those day-to-day things and take over leadership of the organization, and passing on our knowledge and trying to get them to live the ideals that we want to see happen within our business. So we've had, while that's different, there is a sense of commonality there that has been helpful. And then two, what I'm doing here right now and what Jennifer and I are doing with our 20 days and kind of telling our story, and understanding what this venture is going to be. We'd like this to be relatively soon something that's a 5 or 6 day per week set of content where we talk about mentorship and we talk about faith and we talk about being the right person at the right time in somebody's life, and where people have been that person for us. So that idea of having something new is important to both Jennifer and I. We're both really good starters and have to focus ourselves on operating things. So we're kind of in that in-between state now with our 20 days where, okay, ideas in place, we're having good success with what we're doing, we feel comfortable with what we're doing, but now we've got to scale this. And that's something that we'll continue to work on. And then the last thing here that I've done personally is I've reinserted creative aspects of my life in a greater percentage of my time. Like I said, I played music professionally starting when I was 14. and I'm back to that now. Starting to play some music with a group of guys here locally in a band called The Difference. No, the website's not up yet, but I'm working on it. I've got some other things in the hopper related to music, whether it's writing or some of my older music friends like Tom and Quint and the band Irrational Exuberance, and using that as a creative outlet to write. I've been asked by a couple of other groups around town to at least sit in periodically, so I'm getting the idea of playing a little different music here and there than just the stuff that I get from Irrational Exuberance or The Difference. So that's been super helpful. And then the other thing we're doing is related to our 20 days is doing some writing. We're working on at least one book with the working title of In the Belly of Faith, where Jennifer and I both talk about her medical episode and the ovarian cancer and all that she went through. And then the two things that I had going on that kind of bookended what happened to Jennifer. And again, both of my incidents were related to abdominal types of issues. So we thought the In the Belly of Faith and how it helped me in particular find and define my faith journey. So those are things that we're working on. So we've got plenty of things to do there. Structurally, we're trying to add a little bit more to our lives, as both of us are pretty free form people. Like you'll notice I'm doing this schedule with this episode with just a minimal script that I have over here on my screen, which is just literally a handful of bullet points. We're both much more comfortable talking off the top of our heads and dancing in front of a room and making sure that that sort of stuff just comes naturally as opposed to a script. But it comes, I think the word that I heard used a few days ago by somebody was this idea of self-commitment, is committing yourself to results and outcomes as opposed to activities. And that's something I've always focused on in my career and coaching other people, is be focused on outcomes and deliverables as opposed to being busy. Two very different scenarios. I'm focusing a lot more on communications. I don't always do it perfectly. I go through life every day where I think I've said something and I haven't, or I think I said a particular thing a particular way and I didn't, or I think I heard something a particular way and I was wrong. So trying to figure out how to manage that, and the whole idea of this self-commitment stuff is really flies in the face of some advice that I got early in my career, kind of as I was becoming a first-line manager. I went off when I was part of the Mead Corporation to a place called the Center for Creative Leadership, where they do all sorts of diagnostic tests. And they do some 360 reviews. They ask people that work for you, people that are your peers, people that are your bosses, tell me about Dave. And one of the pieces of feedback I got then was I needed to give some more structure to my own life. Do a to-do list, do something like that. And that just wasn't me at that point in my life. So I probably shunned that advice more than I should have. Now it's to a point where it's like, yeah, for the benefit of the people around me, not my own personal benefit, that's probably important. Yes, it's important to me as well, I should say, but it is probably as important that I do that for the people around me. So I'm a predictable force as opposed to kind of a random event popping into people. So I've also had to kind of come to reconcile the idea that I probably have less control over the things in my life these days than I once did. Being a manager or a leader or an entrepreneur, you get to make choices every day on behalf of other people, not just for yourself. So you have some level of control over the environment around you that I probably have less of today, and that's a challenge for me to absorb and deal with every day. So I appreciate you taking the time to kind of listen to these ramblings of my transition. So give some thought to what part of your life is transitioning, and how are you dealing with it? And I'm finding that the idea of structure and the idea of communications are really good focus points for me to help manage that. I've increased my reliance on the faith structures in my life. I do a good bit of volunteering work, with our local church, St. Benedict's Catholic Church here in Mount Pleasant. Intend to do more, and that'll help as well. And it's really going to help me better define this later in life person that I'm aiming to become. So, which will also be, I hope, subject of some later episodes. So again, thanks for taking the time to listen today, and talk to you soon. Hey all, thanks for watching this episode of Our 20 Days. Look for us at our20days.com, and please hit the subscribe button so you're notified of all future episodes as they drop, usually on Thursdays. Thanks for watching.